Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Danger Boys podcast series. My name is Tappers, and today we're going to be talking about Germany in 1920, right? We're going to be picking up from where we left off in the last episode of the podcast series where we talked about the Beer Hall Putsch that took place in 1923, right, with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party trying to take over the state of Bavaria by force. If you missed that episode, go ahead and check the description. There's going to be a playlist to all of my episodes in there. Go ahead and give that one a listen, because the story's not complete if you don't get the full picture. Just a quick on that music you heard at the beginning. So that is music by an artist known as Richard Wagner, right? And we're going to be talking about kind of German ideology in the beginning of this, kind of what led up to the ability of Adolf Hitler to seize control, right, in Germany the way that he did. And Richard Wagner is going to be a key part in understanding how Hitler was able to do that. And so let's get into the episode here. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about German ideology before the 1900s. You know, the foundations that like I said, German society is kind of founded on. This is a quote from Hitler after he had seized power in Germany. He had already become chancellor at this point, but he said, in order to understand Nazism, you must first understand Richard Wagner, right? And like I said, hopefully after we talk about this, we're going to understand that connection, right? So German philosophy in the late 1700s and early 1800s revolved around this idea that existence is suffering. Okay, so whenever we're talking about this, right, we're going to be talking about German people in general, right? There are contradicting philosophies. There are different belief systems within Germany. But this is the general idea, right? And there's this idea, so like for example, in the United States of America, right? The United States of America is founded on the idea that every person has the right for liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? Germans don't really have that ideal, right, during this time period. Their idea is that existence is suffering unless you have the strength to change your means, right? And this idea that the survival of the fittest, right? That the strong will overcome the weak. Those who have a right to rule will rule through force, right? Like that's the idea in German minds during this time period, right? And so in the mid 1800s, a man by the name of Otto von Bismarck created the Second German Reich. Basically, he built up a giant army, and he went and he conquered the Germanic states, right? So the First Reich, right, is the Holy Roman Empire, okay? And the Holy Roman Empire is a loose connection of separate kingdoms underneath the Holy Roman Empire banner, but it's a loose connection, right? It's not a strong national Holy Roman Empire. Like there's not that strong national feeling, right? It's the local feeling. And so Bismarck kind of changes that by uniting all these kingdoms, all these, Germanic states under one German Reich banner, right? That's Bismarck's plan. That's what he does. And so after the Austro-Prussian War, you have the United Germanic States under the Hohenzollern Empire, right? And they're linked to the Habsburgs. And, you know what I mean, that whole royal, it's a whole hodgepodge of everything kind of deal. But that's who takes control, right? The Holy Roman, or the Hohenzollern Empire. And so there's this idea, right, from German people that got all united under this banner. And the Hohenzollern Empire was very successful. And so was Bismarck. And so this idea that Germans should be led by, one or two very strong people with a strong national government kind of takes its roots now, right? Under Bismarck, under the emperor. There's a German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, and he's a major influence on the Nazi Party, right? And so there's a lot of influences on the Nazi Party, right? Nietzsche is one of those people that get brought up the most. Hitler pulled from tons of different places in order to get his ideas that he would use to create basically like the Nazi ideology and the Nazi philosophy. And so Nietzsche had this theory, right, that an Übermensch would come along one day and lead the German people, right? And this idea of the Übermensch comes from Nietzsche's idea that the German people are culturally superior to other cultures, and he uses people like Beethoven, like Mozart, right? Then there's a ton of other German philosophers out there. He creates this idea that the German ideals, the German foundation of civilization, is so good that it will spread across the world, right? And that Germans will, just like the Roman Empire did, right? Like the Roman Empire influenced the world around it, the Germans would do the same kind of deal, right? And so Hitler, right, hears about this Übermensch theory, and he goes, yep, that's me. I'm the Übermensch. I'm the guy that's going to unite everybody. I'm the one that's going to spread German love all over the world. But of course, he forgets that love part, and he forgets that part, and he just like, no, we're going to kill everything, and we're going to rule everything with an iron fist, right? And so you have this idea with Germany that Bismarck, right, creates, where it's like, no, you need a strong army that will go out and conquer. And you have Nietzsche saying that German ideals are superior, and Hitler takes the idea of a strong military and Nietzsche's superiority and kind of smashes it together to create the Nazis, right? And that's very basic. I'm not going into depth here. This is not a philosophy course, right? If you want to learn more about Nietzsche, go and read Nietzsche, right? So like I said, I'm being very basic here, but I'm trying to, boil it down to its, the bare bones and try to give it to you as simply as I can. All right, so now we got to talk about Richard Wagner, right? So whenever the Holy Roman Empire is happening, right, and the German people are kind of tribal in like their individual kingdoms, you have these common Germanic folk tales, right, that every child hears growing up kind of deal, right? You hear about the Valkyries, and you hear about Jormungandr and Thor, and these stories of like Brumhilde, and going and slaying dragons and climbing mountains, and all that jazz, right? These are these common folk tales that are learned. Richard Wagner, right? He takes these ancient Germanic tales, these folk tales, and he combines them with moving operas, these epics. I mean, they're hours and hours and hours long. And what this does is it creates a bridge, right, between these old Germanic folktales that everybody knows from like the tribal days to the new Reich that had formed, right? So these operas that come out, they come out while this German Reich is being created, right? While Otto von Bismarck is on his march, and like I said, the Hohenzollern Empire is being founded, Wagner is releasing these operas. And so it combines everybody under this big national banner, right? And it's a way to connect all German people under one common, thing. And so, also too, Wagner was an anti-Semite, right? He was a massive anti-Semite. He was a, he was a full-on believer, right? Like, I mean, he was as far into it as you could possibly get, right? And so Hitler uses Bismarck, right? The idea of a strong military. He uses Nietzsche, who is this idea that Germans are superior, and he uses Wagner as the Jews are the plague of the earth. And he combines all of that together into Nazism, right? That's how, in order to understand Nazism, you must first understand Richard Wagner, all right? And that's what that means. Is Hitler's taking this hodgepodge of German ideals, sticking them together, and producing the worst possible thing that anybody could possibly think of, the Nazi Party, right? And so, like I said, so Hitler would use all this to establish his own Reich, right? The Third Reich, right? He's like, no, the the Weimar Republic, which we talked about in the Beer Hall Putsch episode, he was like, the Weimar Republic is not a part of this. They're a weak government. They're a terrible government. And I am going to continue the legacy that was built by Bismarck by creating the Third Reich. And that's how he does it. And so now we're going to go on to his trial, right? So now that we understand the German mindset as far as a strong leader and this strong idea of nationalism, this strong national government, this idea of war, and the strong taking control, right? Now that we've talked about that, now we can understand the mindset of the people who witnessed Hitler's trial in Germany, right? So like I said, Hitler and his collaborators were arrested. All of his collaborators were arrested except for two. I think two of them escaped to like Austria, but the rest of them were all arrested. The Nazi newspaper, the Völkischer Beobachter, right? The Völkischer Beobachter was a Nazi newspaper that was purchased in like 1920, and it just produced propaganda for the party. And that was forced to stop publication. So although Hitler was very distraught after his arrest, he quickly realized, though, that he had a great opportunity in front of him with this trial that was upcoming. And so he used his connections from the Nazi party to ensure that the judges presiding over him would be sympathetic to him, right? And we go back, and like I said, the Beer Hall Putsch episode, we talked about how right-wing extremists who committed political assassinations and these horrible crimes would get off with either little or no jail sentence, or they'd be allowed to escape the country, you know what I mean? So these people that have committed these horrific crimes are already getting off, and so Hitler realizes that he's probably not going to face any jail time either. And especially, too, finding a judge that would be sympathetic to him is not a hard thing to do. And so... And whenever he did find that judge, right, the judge basically allowed Hitler to run the court. He could do whatever he wanted. His opening statement was 4 hours long, right? And that's just like the first of many, many speeches. Hitler was allowed to cross-examine witnesses anytime he wanted. He was allowed to speak anytime he wanted. He could just get up and walk around. He was allowed to do that. He could do whatever the hell he wanted. And so he took full advantage of that. Ludendorff, right? We talked about Ludendorff in the Beer Hall Putsch episode. He, at first, is the most famous person on trial, but very quickly Hitler takes center stage, right? And Hitler did this, right, knowing that the world's press was watching, right? Major news outlets from all over the world are there, all over Germany, and they're all there covering Hitler's trial, right? And so this is the first time that people around the world are going to hear Adolf Hitler's name. And he, like I said, he takes full advantage of that by going on these long speeches. And I have an example of one of his speeches from this. And this will kind of, I'll be able to explain most of the trial off of this one speech. So he says, "I alone bear the responsibility, but I am not a criminal because of that. If today I stand here as a revolutionary, it is as a revolutionary against the revolution. There is no such thing as high treason against the traitors of 1918. If there were, the three men who headed the government, the army, the police in Bavaria, and who had conspired with him against the national government were equally guilty and should be on the dock beside him instead of on the witness stand as his chief accusers." Right? So Hitler says, I alone bear the responsibility, right? I did this. I fully take accountability for my actions. I tried to overthrow the government. Yes, I did that, right? There was a lot of coups, right, throughout this time period when the Weimar Republic was in its infancy. And what a lot of these people did who got caught after trying to do their own coups was they tried to shirk responsibility. They didn't say that they meant to do it, or they didn't know what they were doing, or whatever, right? Hitler says, no, I'm not going to make that mistake. I'm not going to try to cower away from this. I'm going to claim exactly what I did, right? And he justifies it by saying that he is a revolutionary to the revolution, right? He's saying that this revolution that started after World War I, this Weimar Republic that's been created, we overthrew the emperor, right? A lot of people in Germany at the time wanted a return of the Hohenzollern Empire, right? They wanted Wilhelm II back on the throne, right? He was the guy who was in charge before and during World War I. They want him back, right? And so Hitler is saying things that if you want Wilhelm II back on the throne, you agree with, right? And then again, too, so he says there's no such thing as high treason against the traitors of 1918, right? He's talking about the Novemberist criminals that we talked about in the last episode. He's talking about them. And again, whenever we say November criminalists, right, we're saying Marxists, we're saying Jews, we're saying, people that Hitler would go on to kill in concentration camps. He's talking about them, but he doesn't say Jews. He doesn't say Marxists. He says traitors of 1918, right? That's anybody. So whether you're an anti-Semite or not, if you believe in the Novemberist criminals myth, even if you don't believe it's the Jews that were behind it, if you believe it was the Marx, or if you don't believe it was necessarily any political party itself, but just the government that failed, he's giving you something to latch on there, right? This is why I did it, because the traitors need to be punished, and I am going to be the person to punish the traitors. And he says, and if there was a crime, right, if I had committed a crime, which I didn't, but if I had, the three men who headed the government, right, the army, that was General Otto von Losel, the police in Bavaria, I think that was Carr, and the head of the government was Seyssens. No, Seyssens was the police, Carr was the government. So he's saying that these three leaders of Bavaria would have also been should be convicted of crimes because they conspired with Hitler, and they did. Before Hitler did his Beer Hall Putsch, Carr, Losel, and Zeisser also wanted to overthrow the government. They too had their own plan. The thing is that they were planning it so that way Hitler wouldn't be in charge, and so Hitler got the jump on them. But that being said, they did conspire against the national government, and they can't deny that. He said they should be on the dock beside him instead of on the witness stand as his chief accusers, right? He's saying the people who have the most evidence against me, the people who are saying I committed these crimes, have committed the same crimes I did, allegedly, and they have no right to accuse me of anything. Okay? And so again, too, Hitler has complete control of the court. And Ludendorff, right, General Ludendorff, still has the respect of a German officer. And so they call Ludendorff to the witness stand, and they call him, your Honorable Ludendorff. This guy just tried to overthrow the government with a gun, and they're calling him your Honorable. And also, too, everything that Ludendorff says is taken at face value because he is a general, right? Like, he has so much respect, and there's so much awe around Ludendorff that whenever he says something, it's taken as just facts. So they'll ask Ludendorff, did these three men conspire with Hitler to overthrow the government? And he'll say yes. And then that's immediately, it's condemning evidence. And so Hitler also talked about how the nation needed a strong government with a strong leader, aka himself, right? That's who he's saying that we need a strong government, we need a strong leader. I think I would do a good job of that, not saying, but also, and he would continue on. He stayed away from the anti-Semitism, and he stayed away from him taking dictatorial powers. He's merely stating at this point that the government should be removed, a new government should be put in place, and it needs a strong leader. Again, calling back to Bismarck, right? He's calling back to the Second Reich. He's calling back to the Hohenzollern Empire. He's saying we need a strong person back in power. And yeah, so that's where Hitler's taking his stance. That's how he goes through his trial, and he wins over public reception, right? People see him as a sympathetic nationalist who made a dumb decision, right? Like, they're not condoning what he did. They're not saying that what he did was good, but the reasons behind it to a lot of Germans is good. He wanted to fix the nation. And remember, too, like I said, going back to the Beer Hall Putsch episode, like I said, if you haven't listened to it, you really should listen to it, because like I said, there's a lot of information in there that's going to be relevant now. Take a drink of water. Oh, I needed that. Okay. Oh, we're back, baby. Let's see if I can put this down without making any noise. Okay. So Hitler is trying to invoke these strong ideas of Bismarck, right? And he's trying to win over the people, and he does. He successfully wins over public support, right? They see him as a strong nationalist leader, and again, he becomes very famous for this, because he's this crazy lunatic with a gun who tried to overthrow a government, right? So Hitler gets, he goes on trial and he does a great job defending himself. All right, so Mein Kampf, right? So while Hitler's in jail, right, even during his trial, he's already thinking about what he's going to do next, how he's going to rebuild the party, how he's going to get back on his feet, right? Because he goes into this courtroom, right, and he completely controls the place. He knows he's going to get off easy, right? I mean, from his opening statement that went 4 hours, he knows he's getting off easy. So he already begins his plan of creating this new world order, right? And so he calls on his friend Rudolf Hess. We're going to go into Hess later on, and there's a couple other names I'm going to bring up later towards the very end of it. We're not going to go into those people right now, but we will in a future episode. So Mein Kampf, right? So he gets his buddy Rudolf Hess, and Rudolf Hess starts dictating the book. It would contain a blueprint of what would become of Germany, right? If you read Mein Kampf in 1925 when it was released, you would have a crystal ball into the future of Germany, right? You would see everything in this book that Hitler talks about wanting to do, he ends up doing. And it's something that we'll talk about at the end of this slide. But for right now, right, Hitler says that that Germany needs to expand in the east, right? It needs to force itself into Poland, and it needs to start forcibly taking land from Russia, right? And he wants to create this Volkish state, right, within this German utopia, right? And Volkish is this idea, right? It loosely translates to blood and soil, but it means a lot more than that in Germany to Germans. It goes back to like tribal bonds. It's hard to define. It's a feeling. And it like I said, it doesn't come across necessarily through definition, right? But just know that it's this union of pure Aryans that has a deep root within Germany, right? And he wants to create this Volkish state, right? Eliminating all the Jews. Okay, it's going to be time and time again with Hitler, especially so whenever he was in his trial and he had all the world watching him, he was very hesitant to talk about his anti-Semitism and that he didn't want to bring it up, unnecessarily. And so he talks about it in Mein Kampf, though. He talks about it because this is going to be like the Nazi handbook, right? And so he talks about it a ton in here because it's like that, it's the stuff that you need to know, but, you say the quiet part, kind of deal, right? And so he has a quote here: "Nature is not reserved this soil for the future possession of any particular nation or race. On the contrary, the soil exists for the people which possess the force to take it," right? He's saying, so if someone were to ask him, well, Poland has a state and they're a country, like what gives you the right to take that? Well, Hitler says that this soil has existed long before Poland existed long before Russia existed. And this soil solely exists for anybody who has the means to forcibly take it, right? This goes back to Bismarck, right? And the idea of a strong military dominating its neighbors, conquering, and then, possessing, right? And so Hitler uses that idea of the strong military to create this German utopia, right? Under the Nazi banner. Hitler felt that he had an advantage over the USSR because communism made them weak, right? He severely underestimates the power of the Soviet Union and Stalin, right? Hitler does not understand Stalin at all. And whenever we get into talking about Stalin and the USSR and the relations between Nazi Germany and the USSR, we're going to see that. But Hitler is sorely mistaken. But that being said, he will take Poland, and he will take the war to Russia, right? So he attempts to take the land. He also goes on to say that the Jews must be eliminated from all of Europe, right? He said even the lands that we don't touch, like if we can't conquer everything, the Jews still need to be eliminated at whatever cost, right? Like that's his main priority, is killing all the Jews. He accepts that war with France is inevitable, right? He says, look, the Rhineland and the Ruhr, which again we talked about in the Beer Hall Putsch episode, these need to be solved. These issues, these problems with France, I got to be solved one way or another, and we're going to go to war with them. And then he sees Italy and Great Britain as potential allies, right? So this is backwards from how most German people feel during this time period, in that Italy had just beat them in World War I. Great Britain had beat them in World War I, right? The Allies had risen up and completely bashed Germany down. And so people hear this, they go, well, he wants to be friends with Italy, he wants to be friends with Great Britain, what the hell is he talking about? Well, of course, right, Mussolini had just overthrown the government in Italy, a couple years earlier, and so he's a fascist dictator, and Hitler wants to be a fascist dictator, and he's like, well, we can be allies, we can be friends with Mussolini. And Great Britain, right, Hitler has this weird thing with English people in that he wants to eliminate everybody else and create this pure Aryan state. But he's also like, well, but Great Britain can exist too. They're allowed to exist. I'm kind of cool with Great Britain. I don't understand that from Hitler, really. I mean, as we get deeper into this series and we look further into the story of the Nazi power, Nazi storyline throughout the war and everything, maybe we'll find an answer to that as far as why Hitler has this kind of respect for Britain that he doesn't have for anybody else. And then so something else too, Hitler decides very quickly that a forced coup would never work again. And the next time he tries to seize power, it must be done through democratic means, right? He's like, okay, the armed putsch is not the way to do this. We have to win the votes. We have to get into the government legally, right? And then overthrow the government once we are the government, right? And so after serving 9 months in prison, Hitler was released in December 1924. The first volume of Mein Kampf was released in the fall of 1925, but it did not sell well, right? And this is something that, like I said, if the governments of France and Great Britain and Poland and Russia had read Mein Kampf before Hitler came to power, I think, world history would look a lot different. Because whenever I say that it's a perfect outline of what he's going to do, this is exactly what he's going to do. It's a poorly written book in that it's impossible to read. He meanders and wanders off on, rants and, tirades and stuff. But when he gets back to the focus and he gets back to the point of the book, everything that he wants to complete, he's going to eventually. Not for very long, right? But for long enough, for too long, he did everything he wanted to do. And so, like I said, Mein Kampf did not sell well at the beginning. It sold like 12,000 copies its first year, and it slowly decreased in sales until like 1927, whenever it started selling more. So after his release from prison, right? So Hitler's released in December 24. From 1925 to 1929, right, the Weimar Republic gains control over the nation and political unrest settles, right? There's no more political assassinations. You can't just go out and beat up your political opponents like you used to. Like that doesn't happen anymore. The Nazi Party was completely outlawed from the time Hitler got arrested until he was released, right? Like I said, the Volkischer Beobachter was not allowed to print newspapers. The Nazi Party wasn't allowed to meet at all. Pretty much everybody in the leadership was arrested with Hitler. And so after Hitler gets released from jail in January of 1925, he meets with the Bavarian Prime Minister and signs an agreement stating that he would never again try to overthrow the government by force. He basically promises the Bavarian prime minister that, hey, I'm going to be a good boy. I'm not going to, violently overthrow the government ever again. With a little like a wink and a nod. So he was allowed to start speaking again, right? Under the pretense that he was not going to speak about the Weimar Republic failing or how, this Nazi revolution should happen, right? As long as he talked about political, issues, foreign policy or whatever, he was all right. Well, after about a month of being allowed to publicly speak, Hitler screwed up. He started saying that the Weimar Republic was failing and that it should be overthrown. And so he was forbidden from giving speeches. You're not allowed to talk anymore, right? And the Bavarian government thought that this would, stop Hitler, right? That if we can get him to shut up, no one's going to be able to listen to him anymore, and the Nazi Party is going to go away, right? This is their way of dealing with the Nazi Party. Not bringing a fist down on top of it, not turning the party or Hitler into a martyr, right? They don't want to do that. And so what they're going to do is they're just going to kind of just silently push Hitler off to the side and just hopefully he, goes away, right? The problem is that the Bavarian government, and also too, it's like the Bavarian government bans the Nazi Party, and then every state after that bans Hitler from speaking, right? They don't ban the Nazi Party, I'm sorry. They banned Hitler, they forbidden Hitler from speaking, and then all of the rest of Germany basically agrees, and they all put a ban on Hitler speaking. So it's not like he can go up to a different state and speak there. He's not allowed to speak anywhere in Germany. So, like I said, people underestimate Hitler. They underestimated his ability to organize, right? And so while he's unable to talk, and he's facing potential deportation, right? So the Bavarian government, parts of it, the police especially, want to send Hitler to Austria, right, which is his home nation. He's not a German citizen, which means, too, he can't hold political office, right? Hitler cannot be voted to the Reichstag. He cannot be voted into office because he's not a German citizen. Right, so he revokes his Austrian citizenship so that way he can't be deported, right? Well, you can't send me back to Austria because I'm not an Austrian citizen anymore. But he does not become a German citizen. He's just not an Austrian anymore. So he has no country, basically. And like I said, so he reorganizes the Nazi Party over the next couple years. He knows that once the Nazi Party is elected into the government, he needs a government to replace the government, right? And he's not going to have a lot of time to do that, right? He's not going to have 9 months to write a whole new constitution and get a whole new system of government in. He doesn't have time for that. And so what he does during the 1920s is he reorganizes the Nazi Party into a government within a government. It's a nation state within a nation, right? He has ministers for propaganda. He has ministers for war. He has ministers for defense. He has all of these positions already marked out with people already in those positions, right? And it's like, well, he doesn't have a military. He doesn't have defense. He has the SA, and he will form the SS. And this is, those are the death troopers, right? Those are the death squads, right? Hitler is organizing these people as military groups. And so whenever he creates this German Nazi state, he's just going to slide his SS and SA officers into the positions of the military, and it's like nothing changed, right? You just mix the two together, you put Nazis in charge, and everything runs basically seamlessly. You're just under a swastika banner now, right? It's very seamless, right? It's very seamless whenever the Nazis take power, and we're going to look at that in a later episode. We're not going to look at that now because that's a whole nother topic onto itself. But just know that the Nazi Party kind of ceases to be a party and it becomes a nation state within Germany itself, with its own hierarchy, with its own schools, with its own education system. With its, you got the Hitler Youth movements, right? You got the Hitler, the Hitler Youth, the boys and girls sections, right? Where boys learn how to be fighters and warriors and, perfect Aryan, Jew killing machines or whatever. And the girls learn to be baby making Third Reich factory, makers, basically. Their job is to stay home, work in the kitchen, and make babies. That's their job, right? And Hitler's teaching that to these young kids who in 10 short years are going to be the people on the front line fighting and dying for him, right? He's already setting up all of that, even in the 1920s. And again, he's not allowed to speak, right? And so what Hitler does is he looks inside the party and he finds people to be a mouthpiece for the Nazi party, right? He finds people that are good orators, but do not have a personality that will overshadow his, right? He's very good at picking out people who will do what he wants without overthrowing him, right? He's still the Führer, he's still the leader of the party, right? And so 3 key elements that we'll look at in a later episode. These are the men I was talking about that we're going to get into later, but we're going to talk about right now to kind of end this podcast. Gregor Strasser, Otto Strasser, and Joseph Goebbels. One of those names should be very familiar to you if you know anything about World War II and the Nazis. They would take leading roles in a northern campaign, right? So Hitler wants to take over Germany, right? And right now he's in Bavaria, which is in the south of Germany. It's a southern German state. He needs to start getting parties, the Nazi party in every part of Germany, right? And so he wants to start in the north, and he sends these 3 men up there to basically start drumming up political interest, right? Holding rallies, holding speeches, organizing, begin getting votes, right, to get members elected to the Reichstag, which Hitler does. They get, hundreds of thousands of votes during this time, which may not sound like a lot, but it ends up getting Nazis something like 35 seats in the Reichstag in the early 20s. And so there's a presence, right? They're far from the majority, but they are a presence. Gregor Strasser would get himself into a lot of trouble. Both the brothers would, Gregor and Otto. They wanted to create alliances with moderates, right? Hitler was extremely right-wing, very fascist, as right can get, right? And Gregor Strasser wants to kind of soften that by siding with moderates, leaning towards Marxist ideals, and like I said, pushing for socialist reforms, right? And Hitler hates that, right? Because like I said, it's the National Socialist German Workers' Party, right? And that socialist is a lie, right? The worker part is a lie. And so Gregor Strasser is reaching out to socialists. He's reaching out to worker unions, right? And he's saying, we're going to be here for you. We're going to help you. We're going to, and Hitler wants to destroy these establishments, right? And so Strasser and Hitler are going to butt heads. And it doesn't end well for Strasser. Spoiler alert. But yeah, so ended here. The Nazi party grew slowly, right, at first. But as the 1920s came to a close, nearly 1 million members would stand behind the future dictator, right? So, like I said, very slowly, tens of thousands at the first. Over the course of the next, 5 years would grow into a massive political wing. And we'll see as 1929 approaches, with the black market crash in Wall Street, what that did for Germany, what that did for the Nazi party, and what it did for Hitler, which was elevate him to eventual dictator of the entire German people. So that's the continuation of the story. We're kind of leaving it in the middle here, where I'll put back on some Wagner. Let's see if I can keep it. We're gonna keep it a little quiet so that way you can still hear me. But yeah. So like I said, I'm kind of leaving it in the middle here, where Hitler hasn't quite come to power yet, but he's out of jail. Yeah, this is I needed to get this episode done. It was more of I had like a compulsion to get this episode done. Because there's going to be some, like, I really like the story of the Beer Hall Putsch, and I like doing the Civil War episodes, because in the Civil War episodes, right, I can kind of tell the story of the battle, right? There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end, right? But doing these long form ones, like the Napoleon series, like this one I've started with the Nazi Party and and World War II, because I'm thinking about doing the next episode, or the next episode in this series, the next episode in this World War II era, is either going back and doing Mussolini and the overthrow of Italy, or doing the stock market crash and looking at that from United States perspective. So that way, whenever we go and look at it from Hitler's perspective, we can kind of see the contradiction between the Nazi and German viewpoint and the United States viewpoint, right? And so it's tough though, because this episode today doesn't really have a beginning, middle, and end as far as the story, right? It ends on this, kind of cliffhanger, I guess. What happens next? I don't know. If only I read a history book. I'm kidding. But yeah. So like I said, I don't really know. It feels kind of weird ending it here. I could have kept going, but I looked and I'm like, man, I'm already at like 30 minutes. Because I recorded. I did like 3 or 4 takes of this, and I might even do another take. I don't know. Probably not. But yeah. So like I said, I didn't love the way that it just kind of kept going, right? Like I couldn't do another hour talking about the whole, like I said, the fall of the Weimar Republic completely, and the overthrow of Hitler, and then the Reichstag fire. Like the Reichstag fire could be its own episode, that can be its own 40-minute episode. And so, like, where do I end it? And I figured right now, like I said, at the end of the 1920s, with Hitler kind of on the precipice of seizing control, I think it was a good place to stop it. But yeah, I think that's a podcast episode. All right, as always, man, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. And namaste.